TSN's Motoring 94 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas. For brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service, trust your car to Midas.
Each week we feature cars of all shapes and sizes in all price ranges. And yes, we've been known to offer the odd opinion. But what we don't do on Motoring 94 is go out and find a, well, for lack of a better word, a lemon, a car with more negatives than positives. And it's for that reason that we've stayed away from this particular automobile, the Lada. Now, as you may know, the Lada is built in Russia. And while affordable, with prices starting around $5,400, the Lada has never been on par with other domestics and imports in the same price range. But Lada has never argued that point. But this year, Lada is entering not one, but two cars in the Automobile Journalists of Canada Car of the Year Awards, better known as the AJAC Awards. So what Lada is saying, in essence, is, hey, we're ready to play in the big leagues. Well, can they make a believer out of Graham Fletcher? We'll find out later on Test Drive. But Lada obviously feels it's ready. Let's find out why. There's an old saying that any publicity is good publicity. Well, if that's true, then Lada officials must have been thrilled when Robosaurus chose a Lada as its meal a few years ago before thousands of fans at the Skydome in Toronto. Okay, so maybe Lada didn't get that excited, but then Lada has managed to grow a thick skin since it debuted in Canada 15 years ago. 60,000 Canadians now own a Lada, and I'm sure many of the early owners would remember the ribbing they took after buying a Russian-built car during the Cold War. Well, today the Cold War is over, and Lada has 12 different models of vehicles on sale, with prices beginning at just under $6,000.
We have been, as a company in Canada, very successful this year. Our sales through the first 7 months of the year have increased 65% over the same period of time last year. And we consider this, even though the numbers are relatively small, to be some achievement, particularly in these economic times, and the fact that the automotive industry is going through difficult times, and the industry is, for the same period of time, off 4%.
It's true that Ladas are among the lowest priced cars on the market, but some believe you get what you pay for.
Yeah, I think there were certainly problems in the past that a lot of cars faced, not too differently than many manufacturers who started up with new cars, including the Japanese, when they first came into the North American market. But I think the attention that has been paid by the factory to quality control and improvement has gone a long way in redefining the value of our cars, certainly from a quality standpoint.
Ladas are built in Russia and shipped to Canada and about 100 other countries, with the big exception being the United States.
That should be at a time when there has been sufficient planning gone into that move, and that the cars are ready for that market, because it's a very large market and you really only get one chance at that market. It's got to be good. And there's no question about the fact that a number of years ago the image was tarnished. But we think that with the products that we have now, both in the quality and the price value, that we have something very tangible to offer to the consumer.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
Any new model is important to a manufacturer. Well, this week on Test Drive, we look at the latest Lada. This is the 1994 Lada Sagona, a car that Lada have very high hopes for. The question is, can it cut the mustard? Under the hood of the Sagona is a 1.5-litre inline-4 that still uses a 2-barrel carburettor rather than fuel injection. Under certain circumstances, the engine had a tendency to bog down because of the carburettor. Power is rated at 75 horsepower at 5,300 RPM. In the acceleration test, this equated to times of about 15 seconds, slow by any standards. Matched with this engine is a 5-speed manual overdrive gearbox. It works well. The shift pattern is surprisingly crisp and the gates have a positive feel. On the other hand, the clutch is a horror. It has a tendency to grab, and as the car warms up, a considerable amount of chatter develops, neither of which are desirable, making the car a lot harder to drive than it otherwise would be. The Sagona uses rack and pinion steering. The feel is fairly positive, and despite the lack of power assist, the setup does not feel overly heavy. Even close parking maneuvers are accomplished with relative ease. On the highway, the feel becomes a little vague, a lot of which can be put down to the fact that the steering wheel is a small diameter, a diameter that is less than that of your average dinner plate. The result is that any small movement of the wheel results in the car darting in that direction. This Lada is truly horrible through the pylon test. Now, it's partly because of the amount of body roll, but it's also down to the fact that this tiny steering wheel is really Mickey Mouse and very difficult to handle. The suspension is comprised of McPherson struts up front and a crossbeam with trailing arms in the rear. Now, the ride is reasonably comfortable, and with the exception of really rough roads and the pylon test, so are the handling characteristics. That said, there is an inordinate amount of body roll during fast cornering and a distinct amount of nosedive under hard braking. The brakes are comprised of front disc and rear drums. During the brake test, we required 123 feet to stop from 80k. While a little longer than usual, these figures are not out of line. The fact that the rear brakes needed adjustment and there was a considerable amount of brake chatter from the front certainly did not help things. Here, the benefit of the doubt has to go to the car because I don't know if the brakes have been abused before my test. There's an old saying, you should never judge a book by its cover. Well, this Lada is a classic example because from afar, things look quite nice. However, closer examination reveals a very different story. The quality of the materials used throughout the car is poor to say the least, and the quality of the fit and finish, well, it's quite simply laughable. The fit and finish problems were numerous to say the least. The gap between the hood and fender is huge, the fender flares were buckled and poorly attached, the door panels were loose, the right rear door jammed shut, the entire rear light cluster had been installed at an angle, and the rear valance looked ready to drop off, one of the corners already broken. The very poor choice of interior materials was highlighted by the dash. The trunk on this new Sagona is quite large and quite well laid out. However, like the rest of the car, it has its shortcomings too. There's nothing down here to protect the spare tyre. If you buy this car, do yourself a favour. Go to the hardware store and buy a piece of hardboard and fit it in underneath the carpet. That way, the next time you drop something heavy in there, you won't wipe out the sidewall. On a brighter note, the Lada comes with some good standard features. A locking gas cap, 3-point seat belts for all outboard passengers, a great set of Goodyear all-season radials complete with a full-size spare, a very nice radio that comes with 4 AudioVox speakers, a fold-down rear seat, which by the way we couldn't lower because the right rear door was jammed, and a nifty device that will be welcomed by other road users. As you load the car up, a switch on the dash allows you to adjust the headlamps down, meaning you don't blind oncoming drivers when the car is loaded. Elsewhere, the Lada features a complete analog dash, a rear seat that offers plenty of room and reasonable comfort, front bucket seats that are nicely shaped, and despite their soft nature, offer reasonable comfort. Well, that's it for this week's test drive. I think I've answered the question I posed off the top. I don't believe this car cuts the mustard. I know if I had $9,900 to spend on a new car, it would not be spent on a Lada. Unfortunately, test drive taught me a lot more than I really needed to know. You know, since these Ladas are built in Russia, you'd assume it'd be much easier and quicker for a Russian to order a Lada than a Canadian. Well, not so. In fact, Lada is offering something they call a gift program to their Canadian customers. This is how it works. If you have a relative or a friend in Russia that would like to purchase a Lada, you will purchase a Lada for them here in Canada. Lada will ship the vehicle over to Russia, and they'll receive it in about 60 days, which they tell me is much quicker than if a Russian tried to acquire a vehicle in Russia. So there you go. All right, it's now time to head to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
If you remember last week's show, we showed you how a distributor system worked and how this was basically the heart of the entire ignition system right here in the distributor. Now, as you can see, that's a pretty big, bulky item. And in 1984, the Buick division decided to eliminate that component and come out with what they call a distributorless ignition system on their 3.8 V6 turbo engines. Now, since then, there's been a lot of other variations of distributorless ignition. We've got another one here today. It's out of an '89 Chev Cavalier. It's a 2.8 V6, and we'll be able to see how some of the components in that system operate. Now, we've got the engine on a stand, so we can roll it around pretty easily and see some of these locations. I'll turn it up a little bit, and on this side of the block is where the module and ignition coils would live on this engine. They mount on these studs right here. There's an aluminum plate that we've removed already, but the module, which is in my hands right now, would sit right on that aluminum plate, something like that, and then the ignition coils would plug onto these 6 terminals on the ignition module. Now, an advantage to this particular setup is the fact that this can now be moved to remote locations in the engine compartment. It doesn't necessarily have to be here. For packaging purposes on different cars, it can be moved around. Now, as we turn the engine over a little bit farther, I've got the engine oil pan off so that you can see a couple of other features of this system. You can see this counterweight in the middle of the crankshaft has some slots in it here and here, and the crankshaft position sensor on this particular engine goes into a machined hole in the block, and it's this little sensor. It's a magnetic sensor. As you can see, it sticks right to the engine. This picks up crankshaft position and synchronizes the firing to the top dead center of the compression stroke that we need to properly ignite the fuel mixture in the engine. Now, I'll turn it over a little bit more, and you can see that crank sensor snapping into the block. It just clears this crankshaft by about 1/8 of an inch. And nothing actually touches or moves in this system, so there's nothing to wear out or come out of adjustment. And as a matter of fact, there's no provision for adjusting timing in a system like this, so it's very maintenance free. You know, I'd like to be able to show you this crankshaft revolving and how it just clears that crank sensor, but unfortunately one of my star customers, Brian from Burlington, took this whole maintenance free concept just a little too far, and this engine seized up. Now, keep in mind that this ignition system is maintenance free. There's no adjustments or maintenance required. You never even have to set the ignition timing no matter what you do to this thing. But things like engine oil changes and filters are still pretty important. That would have saved this engine. It went 95,000 kilometers without an oil change, so it's a little bit on the tight side. And Brian, you got those 100 lines ready? You know, I will change my oil, I will change my oil. Monday morning I want them, okay? I'm Bill Gardner from Motoring 94.
What has 4 wheels, a V6 engine, and comes with a giant hot dog? It's called the Wienermobile, also known as the Wienerbago and the Lambo Wiener. It's traveling across North America promoting Oscar Mayer hot dogs.
This is our 23-foot-long hot dog, and we are hot doggers. It is our job to travel the nation, sunning our buns, having miles of smiles. Is the 1988 Wienermobile. It used to be a Chevy van, believe it or not, slightly customized. This is fully loaded. We like to call it a dog with all the fixings. There's a microwave inside, a cellular phone, there is a refrigerator, CB, all the toys.
Look, little Oscar.
The Wienermobile made its first appearance back in 1936 with the chef, Little Oscar, at the wheel, and later on the tube.
Come in, and bring your father. Say, what you making? Sandwiches, real He-Man sandwiches, with Oscar Mayer bologna. Oh, meat bologna. Look at those nice fresh slices. No skins on them either. Tastes good, doesn't it? And say, Dad, you go for these in your lunchbox. Boys and girls, for meat that's fun to eat, make sure Mom gets Oscar Mayer all-meat bologna.
Oh, I'd love to be in a...
12 college grads were selected from 750 applicants to drive a fleet of Wienermobiles, and this was the first hot dog seen in Canada.
Everyone would be in a...
Well, actually, we had to go for a week of training, and it's called Hot Dog High. And yes, it is there that we learn how to drive the Wienermobiles. Most importantly, how to watch our buns. That's the most important thing because they stick out 1.5 feet on each side.
We're handing out wiener whistles to every person we see. It's been great. People are pointing and waving. There's a couple that are like, I'm sure I didn't see that. Kind of a mirage, but it's been fantastic. Everybody's been really friendly.
Well, how did I see it? How can you miss it? So, I don't know, she saw it. We were driving along and she made me stop the car and turn around and come back so she could get a whistle. So I figured we both got a whistle.
Would you like to drive one of these?
On an everyday basis? No. I saw real estate. I don't think wieners and real estate go hand in hand.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Wienermobile even smells like a hot dog, thanks to steam vents that emit the aroma of freshly grilled hot dogs. Before hot dogging off to another city, we asked Linda and Chris how their friends back home reacted to their new careers.
They think I'm the top dog.
They just couldn't muster up the courage to have this job themselves.
Good luck.
Thank you.
We tried.
It was a year ago when Motoring 93 traveled to Morocco. That's where Land Rover chose to introduce its brand new long wheelbase Range Rover. The new Rover featured an additional 7 inches of legroom in the back seat, and the air suspension system enabled the Rover to move up and down for easier entry. Since that launch, it's been nothing but good news for the Range Rover. It was chosen Sport Utility of the Year by the Automotive Journalists of Canada, and sales have soared by 61%. The two big knocks against the Range Rover have been its price, about $70,000, and its styling, which has remained unchanged.
Well, there's a lot of things about the Range Rover that make it very unique, and its appearance is one of them. And you always know when you have something that has artistic value when some people really like it and other people really don't like it. More and more as you come to know the vehicle, we find that people that were at first might say, well, I'm not sure about its appearance, find the beauty in it. You know that the Range Rover is the only vehicle that was ever exhibited in the Louvre in France as a display of artistic design. So that says something about the value of its looks. As far as hanging in there is concerned, I think that the integrity of the product is what's maintained it over the years, and eventually comes to bear fruit with time. In Canada, it's only been here 3 years, so it does take some time, but that's part of the reason for the increase. The future is looking very, very bright. We have a new product coming in the fall. That's Defender 90. Defender 90 will be an open-air vehicle. We hope to position it as a sports car of the 90s, which will mean you'll be able to take the top off. It'll come equipped with 2 front seats as standard with a rear seat optional, something similar to CJ5, that type of vehicle, which is an open-air. Obviously, it'll be larger and stronger, faster, and all that. But that's a very exciting opportunity for us, and it will be priced significantly lower, hoping to price it at under $35,000. And the cat's out of the bag about Discovery. It's come out into the news that we are definitely going to be bringing it into the country next year. And that's a very exciting opportunity for us. Discovery sold in the Europe and the UK and in other parts of the world for about 3 years now. And it's a slightly less expensive model than the Range Rover, more of a recreational type vehicle, more contemporary, and will seat 7 passengers. So it's a very exciting opportunity, and we can't wait for that to land in Canada.
Our Midas tip of the week is going to help you boost or restart that dead car every time. Now, the key thing to remember here is use your headlights as a yardstick of the battery voltage. What I do is I pull the headlights on the dead car as soon as I get there, and I leave them on through the whole procedure. When you get the connections right, you're going to see those headlights are going to show you you've done the right thing. Now, start by connecting the positive to positive. Remember, always connect similar terminals. Positive on the live part of the positive on the dead, negative to negative. And make your negative connection at the dead car your last or final connection. And when you make that connection, don't do it at the battery because you could explode the battery. There's going to be a large spark because there's a difference in voltage. So I'll put my safety glasses on, and when I make that connection, you can actually hear that arc and see a spark there, and the headlights perked up. I know that thing's going to start now just by looking at those headlights. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Not even Graham's test car had as bad a color match as that. But I've seen Russians build Ladas, and I'll explain to you why they are the way they are when I come back in Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
A few years ago, I visited the Lada factory in Toliati, Russia. Now, I rather expected to see slaves chained to their workstations hacking cars out of raw slabs of pig iron with hammers and cold chisels. After all, that's pretty much what they like to drive. But no, there's Hitachi Zosen punch presses, the same kind of equipment Mazda uses to build 626s in Hiroshima, Japan. There's Kawasaki Unimate welding robots up and down both sides of the framing shop. And the Bayer paint equipment, well, that's the same stuff Mercedes-Benz and BMW use. So how come Ladas are such pieces of junk? Well, I think there's two reasons, and they both revolve around the workforce. First of all, the average Russian factory worker has never seen a Honda Civic, let alone ever driven one. He's got no idea what the target is. Secondly, neither Ivan nor anybody he knows will ever be able to afford one. So where's the incentive? Now, Lada is finally learning what every car maker from Toyota to General Motors has already learned. That is that the best car-making technology in the world is useless unless you've got a motivated, well-disciplined, well-trained workforce. From what I saw of the people on the line at Lada, they're none of the above. Now, this visit took place before the recent political turmoil in Russia, but from what we've heard, things haven't improved. But now that they're freed from the shackles of collectivism and are exposed to the rigors of international competition, maybe the Russian factory worker will finally read the writing on the wall, even if it is in the Cyrillic alphabet. After all, they've already got all the robots one car factory can possibly use. I'm Jim Kenzie.
So the Lada has certainly taken its knocks on this week's program, but both Jim Kenzie and Graham Fletcher agree that there is light at the end of the tunnel for Lada, and it doesn't have to be an oncoming train. And you know, today's car buying market is more sophisticated than it was years ago. They want quality, even for $6,000. Can Lada deliver that product? Well, stay tuned for more. That's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 94 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas. For brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service, trust your car to Midas.